Hi, everyone, and welcome to Finding Your Bliss, the show that helps you find and follow your bliss. I'm Judy Librach, and I can't tell you what an honor it is to have Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar with us today. This is an interview I've been looking forward to for a very long time. But before we meet him, let me tell you a little bit more about our esteemed guest. Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar is an internationally renowned teacher and author in the fields of happiness and leadership. After graduating from Harvard University with a BA in philosophy and psychology and a Ph.D. in organizational behavior, Dr. Tull taught two of the most popular courses ever in Harvard's history, positive psychology and the psychology of leadership. He then taught happiness studies at Columbia University, and he's also the creator of the world's first master's degree in happiness studies. A prolific writer, Dr. Tull's books have appeared on bestseller lists all over the world and have been translated into more than 30 languages. I have to share some of these titles with you because it all began for me with the book Happier. That's that beautiful yellow book with the red writing. Happier, Learn the Secrets to Daily Joy and Lasting Fulfillment, which has been a New York Times bestseller. And Martin Seligman, the father of positive psychology, called the book the backbone of the most popular course at Harvard. Many books have followed, including most recently, Happier No Matter What, Cultivating Hope, Resilience, and Purpose in Hard Times. That was just published in 2021. Happiness Studies, an Introduction, and Shortcuts to Happiness, Life-Changing Lessons from My Barber. There's so many more. I'm not listing them all. We'll tell you all about them at the end of the show. But the joy of leadership and being happy. You don't have to be perfect to lead a richer, happier life. There are many titles. I encourage you to check them all out at Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar's website, which again, we will give to you at the end of the show. He even authored 2 children's books on happiness and believes that happiness should be taught from kindergarten age to 100 years old. Dr. Ben-Shahar consults and lectures to executives in multinational corporations, educational institutions, and the general public. Topics, of course, include happiness, self-esteem, which is what his thesis was on, resilience, goal setting, mindfulness, leadership, and education. Dr. Ben-Shahar is also the co-founder of the Happiness Studies Academy, as well as being the creator and instructor of the Certificate in Happiness Studies and the Happier School programs. Don't these programs sound amazing? I want to take this master's. I'm going to talk to you about that after. He is also an avid sportsman and a certified yoga instructor whose work bridges Eastern and Western traditions, ancient wisdom, and modern technology, science, and art. This episode is timely because Canada was just ranked the 13th happiest country in the World Happiness Report, and Israel, where Tal Ben-Shahar was born, was ranked 4th. And for those who are interested, number 1 was Finland. I'm so excited to learn about how we all can become happier today with our revered guest, Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar, longest intro in the history of the world. Welcome to Finding Your Bliss.
Thank you, Judy. It's so good to be here.
Dr. Tal, I wonder if you could take us back to when you were 16 years old and you won the Israeli National Squash Championship. And just to let people know, for squash is a very intensely hard game. I want to just tell you all, it's tennis times 1,000. After 5 years of very intense training, you were elated and supremely happy when you won. It was a huge triumph for you. You celebrated with family and friends, feeling ecstatic and happier than you'd ever felt before. You held on to it. And after a whole night of celebration, the next morning you sank. The buzz was gone. And even though you won, the loss for you, I believe, was the knowledge that even though you won an international championship, it didn't automatically bring you the long-lasting happiness you were seeking. Can you tell us what you went through when you realized that an external accomplishment, even one as grand as this one, ultimately wasn't making you happy? And can you paint us a picture of how after that night, you became obsessed with the answer to a single question? How can I find lasting happiness?
Wow. So, Judy, you're taking me back, almost 40 years. And the 5 years leading to the tournament were, I wouldn't say they were a miserable time, but they were certainly an unhappy time. because day in and day out I would feel the stress of practice. It would become much more intense during tournament. Just in general, I was not leading a happy life, but I had hope, and the hope was that when I win the tournament, the national championships, then I'll be happy. Then all the pain would lead to the ultimate gain. When all my questions would be answered, when all the unhappiness would turn to happiness. And it happened, and it lasted for about 4 or 5 hours. And then right after, I went back to where I was before. And you can imagine what I went through then, because first of all, I was baffled. I was lost, because everything that I believed in was just shattered, because I truly believed that the answer to my unhappiness was going to come in that form of success, of that achievement, and it didn't. And it was then that was the first time where I really started to think, well, something's not working here. My model of happiness, which I inherited from many people, from the elders of our society, from people around me, from teachers, the belief that success will lead to happiness, I realized was flawed.
Yes, yes. And just to let people know more about your fascinating background, you were in the Israeli army for 3 years doing your military service. And then later you earned your Ph.D. This is heady stuff at Harvard, worked for 2 years in Singapore as an organizational behaviorist, studied education for a year in England, all the while touring the world playing professional squash until an injury prevented you from continuing at this world-class level. But just to go to Harvard for a moment, where it all began, it must have been such a culture shock to suddenly be catapulted into the iviest of Ivy League schools, Harvard University, Cambridge, Massachusetts, after spending 3 years in the Army. And I love the story about how some of your fellow students at Harvard would complain about the food at the university, and you had to laugh because where you had been, you felt like you were in, this was manna from heaven all of a sudden, right? And so what was that culture shock for you, and what was going through your mind at the time when you arrived in Harvard University, the creme de la creme?
So it first of all, overall, my experience there, and both as an undergraduate and as a graduate student, overall was wonderful. However, it didn't start wonderful. Um, because my expectation, so I'd served 3 years in the military, and I wasn't happy there. I think there are not too many people who are happy, doing military service, but I had to do it. And then I said to myself, okay, now I'm free again, free at last. And here I get to go to this most wonderful place that I'd only, heard about and seen in the movies.
Yes.
And again, I fell into the same trap, Judy, because just the trap that I experienced 6 years earlier when I thought winning the national championships, that will make me happy. I actually once again believed, okay, getting into Harvard, going to Harvard, now I'll be happy.
Yes. I've arrived.
And
Mhm.
I've arrived, exactly. And then very quickly, I became unhappy again. And once again, baffled, distraught, lost. Um, And for the first year and a half, so halfway through my sophomore, my second year in college, I was studying computer science. Why? Because I'd always been good at mathematics and the sciences, and my dad's an engineer, my mom's a microbiologist. It was clear that I would go into the sciences as well because I was good at it,
Mhm.
and that's where I started. But then after a year and a half, realizing, look, I'm in this. Heaven on earth, as you pointed out, being served manna from the sky every day,
Yeah.
uh, loving all the particulars, and yet on the whole being very unhappy. And once again, it didn't make sense to me, and that's when I really changed course. So just one morning, I got up, went to my academic advisor, and told her, I'm switching majors. And she asked me what to. And I said, well, I'm leaving computer science, moving over to philosophy and psychology. And she said, why? And I said, because I have two questions. And the two questions are, first, why aren't I happy? Second, how can I become happier? And these became the defining questions of my undergraduate degree as well as my graduate degrees and later my teaching.
Absolutely. And you started maintaining this fascination with the science of happiness, studying some of the great thinkers of our time: Confucius, Lao Tzu, Aristotle, Friedrich Nietzsche, Plato, and more. And I think you even noticed at the time that a lot of this was actually making you happier. As you studied these great thought leaders and philosophers, you were becoming happier. And you realized ultimately that you wanted to share what you learned. And positive psychology was a course that got you motivated to explore this even further. And I love the way you describe positive psychology. So I don't want to say it. I want to ask you what it is, positive psychology, and why it's so important.
Yeah, so positive psychology, which officially as a field was created by Professor Marty Seligman in 1998, is essentially looking at the full part of the glass. So traditional psychology would usually ask us, what is not working? Now I go to a therapist's office, what's the problem? What do you want to improve in your life? Or a couples counselor would ask my partner and me, what's not going well in your relationship? Or an organizational consultant, a traditional organizational consultant, would look at what is not working in the organization, in the team, the weaknesses. Now, positive psychology comes along and changes all this. It changes the questions. Instead of asking what's wrong, what's not working, it asks what is right, what is
Yes.
working, what's going well in your life, what are your strengths as a manager, as a leader, what's flourishing within your relationship. It's not perfect, nothing is, but what's working there? Let's start there and build on that. And
I
that's a
love that.
radical departure from traditional psychology with remarkable implications, because what we know today, because there's a lot of research on it, we know that when we start by focusing on what is working, not ignoring the weaknesses or problems or things that are not, but focusing primarily on what is working, we are much more likely to grow, to learn, to flourish.
Mhm, mhm. Absolutely. And you have a brilliant acronym called SPIRE that we'll get to in just a moment. But I just want to say that I love that you became obsessed with how to find lasting happiness because, Tal, I'm also compelled so much in a slightly different way to help people find their bliss as a life coach. And before we go any further, I just wanted to ask you about something I read in Sean Mashor's book. I don't know if you're familiar with it, The Bliss Experiment, where he talks about that continuum of happiness, starting from numbing to pleasure, to everyday happiness, and finally to mining, digging deep, as one would mine for gold or diamonds, for deep happiness, purpose, enlightenment, dharma, and bliss. And as a life coach, I work with people to help them mine for this purpose, for their calling. And I really believe that bliss is when you do connect deeply to your purpose on this planet. So where does purpose fit into your worldview of happiness and beyond?
Yeah. So, of course, it's a very important element of happiness. You see, there is a lot of misunderstanding around what a happiness is, or more generally, what a happy life is.
Mhm.
So, people say, oh, I was so happy on the beach doing nothing, or, oh, I'm having this ice cream, I'm happy. No, you're experiencing pleasure at that moment, certainly, but that's not happiness. Happiness goes much broader than that, at least according to my definition. And part of happiness is having a sense of meaning and purpose.
Mhm.
And that leads, as you pointed out, to a much deeper sense of well being, or what I call whole being, because it doesn't just depend on fleeting emotions, because emotions are temporary. We have, our ups and downs 10 times a day.
Yes.
But when you have a deep sense of purpose, something that matters to
Right.
you, well, that leads to a much deeper, more lasting, and more stable sense of well-being.
And couldn't you also argue that when you're looking for happiness externally, like, oh, I got that promotion, I got that boyfriend, I got that, whatever it is, it's external. It could go. I won something great happened. I won that award, that Oscar, and then it's gone the next day. Whereas when you're mining for your purpose, your calling, your why in that deep place. And it's not easy to find. And I know this as a coach, people say, I don't know what my purpose is. And I think about Joseph Campbell talking about follow your bliss. But there's a big abyss between following it and finding it. And so my job as a coach is to help people find it. And I'm sorry to go through this whole thing, but I'm just wondering what you think is the biggest impediment for most people.
Mm,
What gets in the way of us finding it, following it, living it, even searching for it? And why aren't we just happier?
mm. So, Judy, I think you answered this question in your question when you talked about people's belief, false belief, illusion that when they arrive, when they get to a certain place, and that place could be, more money or a certain university or a certain workplace or a partner, or a house, they believe that when they will get there, then they'll be happy. And I've come to call this illusion the arrival fallacy. And this is what it would look like in its extreme, and yet, unfortunately, realistic form. So imagine this. Imagine, a person goes to Hollywood because he has a dream of becoming a movie star. And, the beginning is hard, but that's expected. So he's weighing tables. He's unhappy doing it. It's not what he wanted to do.
Right.
But he says to himself, when I get there, then I'll be happy.
Yeah.
When I become that star, a star, then I'll be happy. And a year goes by, 5 years go by, and after 10 years, he finally gets his break. And he has an audition. He's invited back. He plays in a movie and becomes an overnight sensation. Everything changes for him. Suddenly, he has more money than he knows what to do with. He buys, his dream car or cars, a house in, Beverly Hills. He's suddenly becoming so much more desired by people all over the world. He can have
Yes.
any, man or woman he wants,
Yes.
basically. He's ecstatic. He said it was all worth it. I'm finally happy. I've arrived. And then a month goes by, 3 months, a year goes by, and he goes back to where he was before in terms of his happiness level, because we know that external success only leads to a temporary high. So he goes back to where he was before, unhappy,
Mhm.
with one very big difference. He is no longer sustained by the illusion that when he makes it, then he'll be happy. So he has arrived there, but he realizes that there is no there.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then what happens is that he experiences the abyss. Why? Because he no longer has hope that once he makes it, then he'll be happy. The difference between sadness and depression is that depression is sadness without hope.
Wow.
And right now he's hopeless. And he realized that he cannot find, or he believes that he cannot find happiness in reality. So he looks for it outside of reality.
Mhm.
Now, what's outside of reality? Take your pick. Could be alcohol. It could be through drugs to try to exit reality, or the ultimate exit,
Mhm.
which is, of course, suicide.
Cover.
And this is why we see so much alcoholism or drug addiction or suicide among the very rich, famous, successful. And we look at them and we can't believe they did that or are doing that, because they have everything that we ever wanted, everything that they ever wanted. But why? Because the barrier to their happiness, as well as to ours, is the misunderstanding, misperception, mistake that arriving, achieving, conquering a certain milestone, peak of a mountain, a goal, an objective is what will make us happy. It won't. At best, it will lead to a temporary high.
In your latest book, your 2021 Happier No Matter What, you do talk about service though. And I we were on a TV show together recently, and I tried to say this and I didn't get a chance. But I just believe that when we are utilizing our unique talents and gifts and capabilities in service to others in order to make the world a better place, we can't help but be happy ourselves. We're making others happy using our talents and gifts, as you do, to make the world a better place. So, is service one of the keys to that deeper, long lasting happiness?
Yeah, there is so much benefit to the person who gives, who's generous, that I very often think that there is no more selfish act than a generous act.
Hmm.
Because there are perhaps no better ways to increase our own levels of happiness than by helping others become happier or contributing in some way to others. And many people say, oh, but if you contribute to others and you feel good about yourself, well, that's not really a good deed. Well, they're basically citing Immanuel Kant when they're saying that, who wrote exactly that, a few hundred years ago.
Yes.
The thing, though, is that rather than fighting our inclination and saying that it's immoral or amoral to enjoy generosity and giving, we need to celebrate it, to
Yes.
celebrate our nature. How wonderful it is that we're so constituted that when we contribute to others, we're indirectly contributing to ourselves. Isn't
Absolutely.
nature brilliant?
Oh,
Or God?
absolutely.
Or
Absolutely.
or for whatever reason we were created in the way we were created.
There's a word that someone sent to me yesterday, Tal, that really resonated with me. It's the German word for joy, and the term is Freudenfreude, the antithesis of Schadenfreude, and I think it means being happy for someone else's joy or success. And now science is also suggesting that finding joy in someone else's fortune doesn't just make you a better person, but it actually has a tangible impact on your own mental health. So I was thinking, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could all experience Freudenfreude for everyone? Wouldn't that make everyone happier?
It certainly would. I would just like to add to this. Um, it would be a wonderful thing. And of course, when it happens, we feel better about ourselves as we do about others. And yet sometimes we feel envy and
Mm-hmm.
jealousy
Yeah.
and Schadenfreude. And these are all natural human emotions. And it's important to accept and embrace these as natural, because setting the bar too high and saying, I only want to experience joy in the joy of others, I always want to be loving and caring and compassionate, yeah, that's a nice ideal, unrealistic for most, if not all, mere mortals. And you talked earlier, Judy, about the barriers to happiness, and one of
Mm-hmm.
them being the arrival fallacy. Another barrier to happiness is the expectation or the belief that we can be happy all the time,
Mm-hmm.
or that we can be joyful all the time, or
Yes.
loving, or compassionate, or
Yes.
kind.
Yes.
As human beings, we fluctuate. We're imperfect beings, and the sooner we can embrace that imperfection, the better it is for
Yes.
our happiness as well as for others.
You said there's only two types of people, maybe other than a yogi. I don't know. Maybe yogis experience bliss 24/7. I don't know, enlightenment. But two basic kinds of people that are not happy all the time. And who are they?
Yeah, it's the psychopaths and the dead.
Right.
These are the only two people who do not experience painful emotions:
Right. Right.
psychopaths and dead.
Yeah.
So, if you experience painful emotions, good sign. You're not a
Yes.
psychopath and you're alive.
Yes. I'd love to get into your brilliant acronym called SPIRE that represents the five elements that are important for happiness, which stands for spiritual wellness, physical wellness, intellectual wellness, relational, and emotional wellness. Can you tell us more about these five elements that you believe are integral to happiness as a whole?
Yeah. So, when you look at happiness, you need to look at it on three levels: the universal, the cultural, and the personal. And when you look at the universal elements of happiness, what you find throughout, and again, I didn't make the Spire model up. You find it in Aristotle, you find it in Lao Tzu, you find it in Marianne Evans, you find it in Helen Keller. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I simply integrated what a lot of other people said, and one of my hobbies is creating acronyms, so I created an acronym. But the ideas have been around there, for thousands of years, um, and they're universal. So these are the five SPIRE elements. The first element of happiness is spiritual well-being. The S of Spire, spiritual well-being. We can of course find it in through religion, church or mosque or temple. However, we can also find it in purpose. We can also find it in a sense of meaning in our life. We can also find it in the present, in the here and now, by being mindful and aware. So these are some places where we can find spiritual well-being. The P of Spire, physical well-being, well, that's about physical exercise, for example. You know that there's research showing that regular physical exercise has the same effect on our psychological well-being as our most powerful psychiatric medication.
Wow.
It releases norepinephrine, serotonin, dopamine, the feel-good chemicals in the brain. So physical exercise, nutrition, of course, matters a great deal for our well-being. If we eat processed food and sugar, that's going to affect our mood. If we make
Yes.
small changes in our diet, eat a little bit more healthfully, eat a little bit, maybe more nuts or more
Blueberries.
fish. Sorry,
Blueberries. I don't know.
blueberries, absolutely. Small
Okay.
changes,
Yes.
eat in moderation, which is a rare characteristic trait in our modern world. Certainly in the West, where there is abundance in many places. If we can make these small changes, what a difference that would make to not just our physical health, also to our mental health. Then a recovery, rest is important. It's God needed a day off, so do we. So
Can you tell
that's
that
the
to my
P.
husband? Can you tell
Yeah,
that to my husband? He's a brilliant fertility doctor who actually works 7 days a week. But I think it's so important you talk about this recovery and rest. So
yeah.
important.
It's critical again, not just for physical health, also for mental health, and also for how creative and productive we are. So that's physical well-being, the P of Spire. The I of Spire, intellectual well-being. Judy, one of my favorite studies came out quite recently, shows that people who are curious, who ask questions, who are lifelong learners, actually live longer.
Wow.
So the saying, curiosity kills the cat.
Yes.
Well, it may kill the cat, it helps us humans
The
live
humans.
longer.
Wow.
Curiosity contributes to our overall well-being. So learning, it could be watching online lectures
Mm.
or reading um, on an ongoing basis, or taking a course. There's so much value to that. So that's intellectual well-being. Then there's relational well-being. Number one predictor of happiness: quality time we spend with people we care about and who care about us. This is also where, under relational well-being, that's where also generosity and kindness, which we spoke about, that's where it falls. There's no more important element of happiness than the interpersonal one. And finally, the E of Spire, emotional well-being. Emotional well-being is about, first and foremost, embracing and accepting painful emotions like envy, like anger, like anxiety. And again, as long as we're alive and we're not psychopaths, then we'll have these emotions. Better embrace them. There's a beautiful poem by Rumi, uh, 800 and 900 years ago, called The Guest House. And in it, Rumi writes about how we need to welcome, embrace, invite in all emotions, no matter what they are, as if they're um, envoys, guests from the beyond. Now, I don't know if they're from the beyond or not. That's above my pay grade. But what I do know is that for a happy life, we need to invite them in as guests, embrace them. Because if we
Lovely.
don't, they overstay their welcome. As Carl Jung puts it, what you resist
Persists.
persists.
Absolutely.
And finally, when it comes to emotion, how can we cultivate more joy, more love, more fun, um, and more gratitude? And when we cultivate these generous and these pleasurable emotions, we of course increase our levels of overall happiness, our whole being.
I love that you learned the gratitude piece from Oprah long before the research came out that suggested that gratitude is so important. Can you tell us about that and how you do say 5 things that you're thankful for, or write 5 things at the end of every day?
Yeah, Judy, so it was 19th of September 1999. I was watching Oprah. I love Oprah. And she was talking about a gratitude journal. And I said, wow, what an interesting idea.
Yes,
And I started keeping a daily gratitude journal.
yes.
It was only 4 years later, in 2003, that research actually came out about the importance of gratitude. It was Mike McCullough and Robert Emmons,
Yeah.
UC Riverside, UC Davis. And they showed that keeping a gratitude journal makes you happier, more optimistic, more likely to achieve your goals, kinder, more generous toward others, and physically healthier. It actually
Wow.
strengthens your immune system.
Wow.
And I must say, all these findings didn't surprise me, because I know what a difference that journal is making in my life, because I've persisted, almost, what is it, 24 years
It's
almost.
wonderful. You start to look for things, right? You start to look for things that make you happier because you're like, wait, I have to write 5 things tonight. So, wow, that lovely smile someone gave me, and all the wonderful things that happen, even the smallest things can be put into that journal. What do you think about this thought? H.I. Khan, Khan. However unhappy a man or woman may be, the minute he knows what his purpose is, what his spark is, a light comes on and suddenly everything makes sense and everything falls into place. He could be searching for this his entire life till he's 80, 90. But the minute he knows his purpose, a light comes on and he can be deeply happy. It's probably
Yeah.
more complicated than that, but what does that quote mean to you?
Yeah, so this quote actually reminds me of another quote, which is one of my all-time favorites, by Friedrich Nietzsche, who
Yes.
says, "He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how."
Oh, I got the
He who
shivers.
has a why to live for can bear almost any how.
Love that.
And that quote was quoted by Viktor Frankl in his book, Man's Search for
For
Meaning.
me, yes.
And we know that we are spiritual beings. We are creatures of purpose. We need a sense of meaning and have a reason to get up in the morning. And it could be to provide for my family. It could be to save the blue whales. But whatever it is, it's important that we have it.
Yes,
And what a difference that can make,
absolutely.
because it really is true that when we have this deep sense of purpose, we're able to overcome difficulties, hardships, and challenges. Now, a sense of purpose in and of itself is not enough for happiness, but it's necessary, it's essential for happiness.
It's a great springboard. It's a great starting point, right? And then you have to work with it. Let's go to Harvard for a moment. First year you taught the course, 8 people. Second year, and I know you have a joke about that. Second year you taught the course, 30. Third year, almost 1,000 people, 900 and some people, almost 1,000 students, making it one of the most popular courses ever in Harvard's history. And I kept thinking about squash because it must have been a very heady time for you. And I'm fascinated to know what it was like for you when you were getting all of this momentum all of a sudden, almost like being on a squash court. And you just can't make any mistakes. You have this audience of 1,000 people hanging on to your every word, watching every move you make.
Mm.
What was that like? Was it fun? Was it a trip? Was it scary? Did you ever
Yeah.
sleep? I'm just curious about that period.
Yeah, so Judy, the answer to was it this, that, or the other is yes, because it was all of the above and
Yes.
more. So yeah, of course it was exciting, and we talked about meaning and purpose. Of course, I felt a deep sense of meaning and purpose, and especially when the media got a hold of this strange course and reported on that. I really felt like I was on a mission to spread happiness, as I do today. At the same time, it was also very scary. And it was scary for many reasons. One, because I felt a sense of responsibility for all these students or people who were reading the material that I was writing. But it was also very scary because I'm an introvert.
Hmm.
I'm shy.
Wow.
I get very nervous in front of a large audience, and and standing in front of, was actually more than 1,000. I mean, there were almost 1,000 students, but many of them invited their friends and parents. So and the media was often in the class. I
Oh,
felt extremely self conscious, and especially at the beginning of class. Soon I would get into the flow, and then I would forget the audience and just be immersed in the content. Um, but it was a nerve-wracking period. I look at some of my media clips from back then, almost 20 years ago, and I was nervous, anxious,
yes,
inexperienced. And
yes,
it's not that I don't get nervous today. I still do, and I'm glad I do, because it means that I care.
right.
But then it was it was more painful than pleasurable
Wow,
overall.
wow. But you got better at it, and I know this because I saw an online lecture that you gave. I don't know if it was in person and online, but it was on relationships. And I was so gobsmacked by it, so much so that I recorded it to play for my husband this weekend en route to one of our favorite 12.5-hour getaways, because I'm going to play it all the way there. And it was just how important it is to cultivate your relationship with your partner. And it was so smart and so human. It blew me away. And there's something that you talked about, this concept, this idea of being known rather than being validated in a relationship with your partner or a friend or a colleague, that you say can transform any relationship for the better. Can you tell us more?
Hmm. Yes. So Judy, this really is one of my favorite topics, of course, but also um, research. And this work comes from David Schnarch. David Schnarch, if I have one relationship book that I would need to recommend for people in long-term relationships,
Huh.
it would be Passionate Marriage by David Schnarch. And there he talks about how the emphasis in the research on relationships and the advice given on relationship has been mostly around validation. Tell your partner how amazing they are,
Yes.
validate their point of view. And yeah, that's nice and sometimes important, sometimes more important than other times. But he says it's nowhere near as important as it is to know and to be known within a relationship. Certainly in long-term relationships. At the beginning of a relationship, you validate one another. Naturally, you're in love, you're in lust, everything's amazing.
Right.
But the honeymoon phase is over soon. And it could be after a month, or it could be after 3 years.
Mhm.
And then you need to work. And the analogy that I always give is, imagine you find your dream job. And on the
Love
first
that.
day of your dream job, you just sit there and revel in how fortunate and lucky
You lie on the
you are,
couch,
and
on
they
the
are.
sofa. You lie on the
On the
sofa.
Yeah, and you do nothing, and you just continue to revel and celebrate, and not enough, you'll be fired before you know it.
Exactly.
Not to mention the fact that you'll be bored.
Right.
Yet in relationships, we believe that we can find the right person, our prince or princess charming, and live happily ever after.
Hmm. Hmm.
The problem is that this live happily ever after, the movies, they end where love begins. And what we need to do in love is work. We need to invest. We need to cultivate. How do we do that? One of the most important things to keep in mind is to get to know our partner better and to help our partner get to know us,
Yes. Lovely.
and to know our strengths and our weaknesses, our fantasies and our fears. And the more we get to know our partner, the more intimate our relationship becomes. And that's how you sustain and grow passion over time.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I have about 400 more questions, so I'm going to hopefully get a few of them in. But I have to say, I'm going to have to invite you back on again because there's so many things I want to ask you about. We have to talk about mindfulness. You once said, I don't know if this was in a podcast or I definitely read this. Um, Try to learn mindfulness meditation from a Tibetan monk rather than some guy on the streets of Los Angeles. Like, learn it properly. It's so important. I teach meditation. I mean,
Mm.
you're, a huge a beacon of light in this area. How is mindfulness and meditation so important and so connected to happiness and being happier?
Yeah, first of all, the reason why I recommend learning it from an expert, be it a Tibetan monk or an Indian guru,
Yes.
is because for thousands of years, um, the Eastern traditions, the various Eastern traditions, have been cultivating and developing techniques, whether it's in meditation or yoga or Tai Chi, and there is so much that we can learn from it, and we're only beginning to scrape literally the tip of this wisdom, and the research is quite literally mind-boggling in
Yes.
terms of how much benefit there is.
Yes.
And Daniel Goleman calls our age the age of distraction,
Hmm.
when we and much of it comes from the smartphone, from technology, from social media. We need that dopamine kick every 20 seconds, and we become
Guilty.
less sensitive, we become
Yeah. Yeah.
desensitized,
Yeah.
and what we need to do is cultivate sensitivity. Now, how do we do that? How do we do that? One of the ways is through mindfulness meditation, because we become more conscious, more aware, more mindful, more sensitive to the breath going on in and out, or to our physical sensations, to how we feel. And when we do that, we don't need something sensational to move us, to inspire us, to make us happy,
So true.
because just observing the world or ourselves or other people, that in and of itself is exciting.
It's so
That is
true.
when we become sensitive. Albert Einstein once said, there are only two ways in which you could live your life. One is as if nothing is a miracle. The other is as if everything is a miracle. And by cultivating mindfulness, by becoming more sensitive, we can truly, genuinely, wholly experience life as a miracle.
Beautiful. I love your book, Happier No Matter What, which was published in 2021. I love that you address COVID, the new reality, and how people said, shouldn't we pause and quarantine happiness for a while? And you said unequivocally no. Can you tell us just briefly about how the science of happiness is more relevant now than ever before? And I also loved when you talked about not focusing on all the PTSD we've been through, but instead on PTG, post traumatic growth. Can you say more?
Yeah, so the concept that really for me was an eye opener was one that was introduced by Nassim Taleb. Nassim Taleb is a professor at NYU, originally from Lebanon, and he introduced the concept of anti-fragility. Anti-fragility is what I've come to call resilience 2.0, because resilience 1.0 is bouncing back. Resilience 2.0 is bouncing back higher. In other words, going through trauma and experiencing growth,
Yes.
going through hardship, learning and flourishing
Yes.
as a result. Now, it turns out that many of the tips, the techniques, the advice given through the science of happiness doesn't just contribute to our happiness when things are going well. So we're feeling good, we can feel better. It can also help us when we're unwell. It can
Yes.
also help us when we're feeling down. It can also help us when we go through a global trauma, such as COVID, or through hardships in our personal or professional lives. So all of the things that I spoke about, whether it's physical exercise, whether it's spending time with our loved ones, whether it's expressing gratitude, whether it's learning new things, whether it's finding a sense of meaning and purpose, all these things significantly contribute to our ability to deal with hardship, and not only that, to learn to grow from hardship.
I love your 12 questions and happier no matter what that contribute to your whole person well-being. What a fabulous list. I want to congratulate you on it. One of my favorites is, and guys, you have to read the book to get all of this, happier no matter what. When do I feel the most joy? What do I love to learn? When am I at my happiest? Where do I experience meaning in my life? Do you have a favorite? Because this list just made me so excited.
Yeah. We all have our, favorite spire element.
Yes.
The one that is closest to my heart, I think that I'd say defines me most or best is actually the intellectual
Hmm.
well-being. What can I learn?
Hmm.
Um, what am I curious about? These are for me very important questions because they affect everything else that I do. If I feel like I've learned something new, of course I become a better teacher, but also become a nicer partner. When
Yes.
I learn new things, my emotional well-being goes up, and we know the connection between mind and body. So I'm also healthier there. But the nice thing about the Spire model is that all the elements are interconnected.
Mm-hmm.
So it actually doesn't really matter that much where you start.
Mm-hmm.
The key is to
Is
start.
to start. Yeah.
So you can focus on cultivating your relationships, and that will affect your emotion and a sense of meaning. You can start with learning, and that will influence your physical health and how you feel, and on and on.
You just gave me the perfect segue talking about the intellectual. So I'd love if you could just briefly tell us about the Happiness Studies Academy, your brainchild, how it evolved, and what your dreams are for its future.
Yeah. So the idea for the Happiness Studies Academy actually came when I was on a transatlantic flight, and a question came to mind. And the question was, how is it that we have a field of study for psychology, for history, for biology, for neuroscience, for geography, medicine, you name it. And there's no field of study for happiness. Yeah, there is positive psychology, but that's just the psychology of happiness. What about what philosophers had to say about happiness, and theologians? And what about what literature teaches us, and economics, and history, and poetry, and movies? Why isn't there a field, or rather an interdisciplinary field of study that brings together all the wisdom that that exists in our world? And on that flight, I committed to helping create happiness studies field, an interdisciplinary field. And we created the Happiness Studies Academy, where we offer a year-long certificate program. We have students from over 85 countries, thousands from all over the world, and it's an amazing, wonderful community. And then just less than a year ago, we created the world's first master's degree in happiness studies, which just this morning I taught the last class of this semester. And I can't tell you how much joy and optimism I leave the class with
Oh,
every week. And it's really wonderful to have students from all over the world. It's 100% online, so we have students from different time zones. Some at 2 a.m. for them, others middle of the day. But we're united and driven by one
wow.
goal: spread happiness.
I want to take this course. I'm not just saying this because I'm on the air. I really do want to take this course. So I might be calling your school. There's a story that someone told me at summer camp. You might have heard it. It really resonated with me. And it was the story of Grimaldi the clown. So this man was very unhappy, and he went to his wife and said, "Sing for me, dance for me, make me happy," and to no avail. It didn't work, of course. He went to his children and said, "You try, sing for me, dance for me, make me happy." And as adorable as they were, it didn't work. He went to a psychiatrist who said, all I can offer you is a Band-Aid approach, but I know of someone who can help you. His name is Grimaldi, the clown, and he comes to town but once a year. And he has cured the sick and the crippled and the depressed and the unhappy and the infirm. There is no one that he can't help. And I'm so confident that if you go to the circus, you don't even need to come back to me, but just to give you that extra boost of confidence, come next week. Please come. And we'll sit down, and I know you're going to be cured if you go see Grimaldi the clown. A week goes by, the man comes back, and the doctor says, did you go to the circus? And the man says, yes, I was there. And the doctor says, well, I don't understand. Why aren't you smiling? Why aren't you happy? And he says, doctor, I never will be happy. This makes me cry, because I am Grimaldi the clown. That story affected my whole life. I don't know. That story made me want to do this work and to study. I call it Bliss, but I'm just wondering what your take is on that story.
Wow. Yeah, it is a powerful story. I think if I met Grimaldi the clown, I would say the following. I would say, go and interact with all the people that you have made happy. Go and listen to their stories. Go and be touched by the way they were touched by you. Because and again, I'm thinking to research in the area of meaning and purpose. There is potentially a sense of meaning and purpose in much of what we do, and yet we so often ignore it, don't see it. Think about this example. Let's say you have you have a young child, and you go through the bedtime routine with the child. There are different ways of going through that same bedtime routine. One way is to do it because you have to. It's your responsibility. Another way is to do it because it's important for their future, and they'll be, if you read them a book, they'll be smarter and do better. And the third way of doing it is by recognizing the privilege that you have to be spending time with someone you love. The same, let me share a quick story with you. My business partner, Angus Ridgway, his brother-in-law is a medical doctor. Specifically, he's a cardiologist. Specifically, his expertise is pacemakers, where what he does is puts in pacemakers, and every few years takes it out and changes batteries. And Angus was having lunch with his brother-in-law, and he said to his brother-in-law, he said, finally, Evers, his name is Evers, I figured out what you do for a living. So Evers asks, what do I do for a living? To which Angus responds, Evers, you change batteries. Now, Evers didn't even smile. He looked straight at Angus and said to him the following. He said, Angus, you know what? You're right. Some days I change batteries. Other days I save lives.
Wow.
So the question is of focus. What does Grimaldi the clown focus on?
Yes.
And learning to focus on the difference that we're making. We're all making some difference. Focusing on the important elements, the meaningful elements of our lives, that in and of itself can make all the difference. So our experience of life is determined by external circumstances. Mm-hmm. Even more so, it's determined by subjective interpretations.
Mm-hmm. What is bliss for Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar?
Bliss is about pursuing your passions, doing what you love, what matters to you.
I have to tell you, I thank you for making the world a better place. And how can people connect with you on your website, on your social media, and of course, get your wonderful books? And there are many of them, and they're all great.
Well, thank you very much, Judy. They can, of course, go on my website, which is talbenshahar.com, and there are links there to my books, to the Happiness Studies Academy, and the courses to Potential Life and other projects that I'm involved in.
It was such an honor. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you for helping people find their bliss. I can't think of anything more important than that, anything more meaningful than that.
Each week we spotlight a fabulous person like Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar who is living their bliss. So if you're an author, artist, yoga, meditation, or mindfulness expert, or really anyone who has found and is following their bliss, we'd love to hear from you. fyb@findingyourbliss.com. I'm also a life coach. If I can help you in any way, let me know. And of course, you can reach out to us at the Bliss Minute on Instagram and Facebook.